In today's video, I want to talk about the hottest topic in the offseason so far this year, and that's been the Kevin Durant situation. We know that he's now requested a trade from the Brooklyn Nets, and this is actually one of the more unique scenarios we've seen where a player requests a trade because he is still under contract for 4 years. He's still one of the top 5 best players in the NBA, and some of the mock trades I've been seeing are absolutely crazy. And today I'm going to give 4 what I think are realistic trade scenarios for Kevin Durant that could happen this offseason. So let's get into it. Now, before I actually get into the mock trades themselves, I want to talk about my opinion on this situation in general because, like I mentioned, this is really one of the more unique scenarios we've seen where a player requests a trade because Kevin Durant is still one of the best players in the NBA. He's definitely a top 5 player still. There's a reason why he's been in conversations throughout his career to potentially be the greatest scorer of all time, or at least in the top 3. And this isn't like a scenario like we've seen in the last few years with Kawhi Leonard requesting a trade or Anthony Davis or James Harden, because they had very few years left on their contracts in that situation, whereas KD in this time, he is still locked up for 4 years. And when we look at the stats that are up on the screen right now, it's inevitable that this is going to be one of the biggest returns in a trade that we have ever seen. And this is why we're seeing such insane mock trades, because KD is still playing at the top of his game at this point in his career. He's been consistently putting up these type of numbers, almost 30 points per game last season, consistently very close to being in the 50-40-90 club, last year being an extremely efficient scorer as he always is, with a 63.5% true shooting, putting up about 7.5 rebounds per game and 6.5 assists, continuing to improve that playmaking. And he's also shown that he's a really good defender, using his length to his advantage. Last year was a top year for him defensively, as he had a 42.5 defended field goal percentage. There's no denying how good of a player he still is. Even though he wasn't great in the playoffs last year, that was just one series, and throughout his career he's been really consistent in the regular season and really solid in the playoffs most of the time as well. But with all that being said, here's the truth about this situation that I think a lot of people don't realize, is that I don't think the Nets are going to get as big a return as they're expecting, and I don't think they're going to get as big a return as many fans across the community are expecting. And that's why you're going to see in my mock trades today, they might be a little bit less of a return than a lot of the other mock trades you've seen on social media, because here's the thing, the Nets are not in a position of power in this situation. Kevin Durant is requesting a trade, and the offers that they've sent out at this point are all being declined, and no one really seems to be close on getting a deal for Kevin Durant yet, because they're not really accepting those returns. And the Nets are in a position where, because KD's requested a trade, they're probably going to have to trade him before the season, or you can see lots of problems happening with the team. We saw this with James Harden, how it became a toxic environment when he was with the Rockets, and a little bit of the same thing with the Nets last year as well. Not to mention that even though KD is locked up for 4 years, that might not exactly be a great thing for the team that's acquiring him, because he's going to be 37 when this deal ends, making $53 million. And I don't know if he's the type of player like LeBron, where at 37 he's still going to be at the top of his game. So while it's going to be a huge return for Kevin Durant when this trade does get done, it might not be as big as you're expecting. And this situation overall might be a little bit different than it might seem to a lot of the fans and the Brooklyn Nets. Now let's get into my actual mock trade scenarios. So the first one would send Kevin Durant to the Heat along with Seth Curry, and in return the Nets would be getting Kyle Lowry, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, Nikola Jovic, and 3 first-round picks in 2023, 2024, and 2027. Now, this deal can't be done until August because Jovic isn't eligible to be traded until then, but I think this could get done then because, first of all, the contracts even out in this situation, and when we look at the Nets' point of view, they are getting a pretty big return for this. Kyle Lowry is mostly there just for veteran presence and to make the contracts even out, but they're getting Tyler Hero. This is a guy who averaged around 20 points per game last season pretty efficiently, and he could really be one of their main young core pieces for their future. He's still developing as an overall player, and coming off a 6th Man of the Year win, he's very confident, he's continuing to improve, and if they can really focus on developing him, he would be the focal point of this trade. Duncan Robinson also doesn't have a great contract, but he's a great piece for them. He pretty much evens out with Seth Curry in this case. I think if they can give him some more playing time, unlike the Heat did, I know he's not great defensively, and in the playoffs that's not great, but he can provide a lot of value offensively with his shooting ability. And then Jovic has loads of potential as a creative big man as well, and they can focus on developing him, and then lots of picks in this scenario as well. So a very good return for the Nets in this situation. And for the Heat, getting Kevin Durant, the Heat can't trade Bam Adebayo in this situation because of the designated rookie contract deal, but they would be forming a big three of Jimmy Butler, Kevin Durant, and Bam Adebayo. And I think it was proven a little bit last year that the Heat just need a little bit more of that pure scoring. So KD would definitely fit well with them. Their depth would definitely suffer a little bit, and their offensive system and flow would definitely have to change with all that they're giving up. But they would definitely find a way to make it work with KD, a good screen setter, and Bam, a good playmaker, and him in the middle. They could still run their offense through him. They would still have decent perimeter shooting, and defensively, they would actually pretty much improve here, I think. They still have both Bam, their defensive anchor, and Jimmy. They add some length with KD, and I think overall this is a pretty good trade for both teams. It allows the Nets to build up their future a little bit and still stay a competitive team now, and allows the Heat to really go all in for it, get that pure scorer in KD, and improve defensively a little bit as well. Next up, we got the Raptors mock trade, and as a Raptors fan, when I first heard the KD rumors, I honestly thought it was a joke, but it's growing more and more, and I think Masai could definitely wait this out and try to finesse the Nets a little bit and give up a return that doesn't give up Scottie Barnes or Pascal Siakam. And like I said, once the Nets realize that they're not going to get the offers that they want, I think this trade is definitely doable, and I think Masai could pull it off just like in 2019 with Kawhi. So the Raptors in this case would be receiving Kevin Durant, of course, and the Nets would be getting Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby, Khem Birch, Malachi Flynn, and first-round picks in 2023 and 2025. For the Raptors in this case, they're pretty much, I think it's the same thing as right before 2019, where I think they're pretty much one superstar player away from winning a championship. We saw how their defensive system is great, their offensive system is great, they have good depth, they have good switchability defensively, and a good overall team that does a great job of getting out in transition, but they're missing that one superstar player that every championship team needs. They had it in 2019 with Kawhi, and it pushed them over the top, and now if they got Kevin Durant, it would push them over the top once again. That pure scorer that can go get you a bucket in isolation in the clutch and just be that top 5 player that you need to win an NBA championship. They would be getting that and sacrificing a little bit, but still having Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, and Scottie Barnes, and a very good still and switchable and good on rotations defensive team that can still live by the things that they have made them good over the last few years. Getting out in transition, a good defensive system, they would still have the vast majority of that. Now the Nets in this case would be getting 2 great players that are close to being top 50 players in the NBA are already there, and Gary Trent Jr. and OG, who still have room for development as well. A solid big man off of the bench in Khem Birch, who can help them defensively inside and also with some rebounding, and Malachi Flynn, who still has some potential on both ends of the floor as well, along with 2 picks that they definitely need as well. And in this case, I think this would probably be as good as the return that I did in my Heat mock trade, if not a little bit better. I mean, Gary and OG are really going to help the offensive system of the Nets and get them some more shooting and some off-ball players that can play off the ball and shoot the 3 really well. And then overall, this package would really improve their defense as well, which they need help with. This is the thing that's been holding the Nets back during this kind of era with Kyrie and KD, is their defense, and all of the players in this trade would really help that system. They already have pretty good interior defense. This would make them a little bit more energetic, switchable, have better perimeter defense, especially with a guy like OG, who's really turning into one of the more elite defenders in the game. And this would also help build up their future, and all these players that they're getting can continue to improve. So again, I think this is a great trade for both sides, and right now the Nets might not be satisfied with this return, but I think in a month or 2 they will be. My third mock trade will be sending Kevin Durant to the Suns, and right now they're the favorites to get him. They would be receiving, again, both KD and Seth Curry, and in return, the Nets would be getting DeAndre Ayton, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and first-round picks in both 2024 and 2026. So let's talk about the Suns' point of view with this one. Right now, they have a really well-balanced team that's dominant in the regular season, but can't quite get past the hump in the playoffs, both in 2021 and 2022. And I think it's the same thing that I said with the Raptors, but they're an even better team, where they're just that one superstar away, because right now their best players are Chris Paul and Devin Booker, who aren't really top 10 players, who really, and we saw this year, especially against the Mavericks, struggled to get buckets down the stretch in clutch playoff games, and KD would come in and be that number one scorer for them. They would definitely sacrifice some defense and some depth with this trade as well, which every team trading for KD in mock scenarios would be, but they would be forming a big three of Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant. They would be an absolute mid-range killing team, still have good ball movement offensively and great three-point shooting and a great offensive system, and the coaching of Monty Williams will still probably propel them to being a top 10 defensive team as well. They still have Bismack Biyombo off the bench, who can provide a lot of minutes at the center position. He held his own last year, so he could replace Ayton. And yes, like I said, they would still be losing lots of defense with both Bridges and Ayton, but this is what the Suns need to push them over the top. They need that dominant score like KD. Now, for the Nets in this scenario, again, this would drastically improve their defense. It's kind of weird, and this trade can't happen really yet because of the whole DeAndre Ayton situation and how he's an RFA that isn't signed, but a sign-and trade could happen, and this would be a really good return overall for the Nets. Ayton can be their defensive anchor. Bridges is one of the best defenders in the league, and offensively, they have now a floor spacer in Bridges who does a great job of cutting to the basket as well and shooting threes, a good screen setter, and a classic traditional big man in Ayton who can average at least 15 and 10, and then a great shooter in Cam Johnson as well, who can space the floor, provide some good defense as well, and some picks. So this would really improve the Nets' depth. This might be the best return out of all of them and the best possible scenario for both teams. The last mock trade I have would send Kevin Durant to the Grizzlies, and I think this is a really underrated one that not a lot of people are talking about. The Grizzlies would be getting KD and along with Cam Thomas, and be sending back Jaren Jackson Jr., Dillon Brooks, and Zaire Williams to the Nets, along with first-round picks in 2023 and 2025. I almost threw in Brandon Clark instead of Williams, but I honestly think that would make the trade a little bit lopsided for the Nets. I think that would be a huge return, and the Grizzlies would be losing a little bit too much defense and depth off of their bench and Brandon Clark. I think Clark's really one of the best role players in the NBA, and if it comes to the point where the Grizzlies need to out-offer another team, they could potentially do that, but I think it's going to get to the point where Williams will pass as that third player because of what the Nets are getting in Jaren Jackson Jr. and Dillon Brooks. Those are two fantastic defensive players. Brooks is a great perimeter one-on-one defender. Jaren Jackson Jr. led the league last year in blocks in the regular season and is a great interior defender. And then they're getting over 15 points per game with both Brooks and Jackson Jr., 2 first-round picks in 23 and 25, and Williams, who still has potential and can develop as an overall player, and he can be a secondary shooter. He can just develop that jump shot a little bit more, provide a little bit defensively with his length, and he could be a decent role player as well. So I think the Nets are getting a great return here. Again, Clark could be included if they need to eventually out-offer the Suns or Raptors or another team like that. And then for the Grizzlies in this case, again, a theme we're seeing is just sacrificing depth and also defense, a great interior defender like Jaren Jackson Jr., but they could sign another center or Steven Adams could step in there, and I think this would propel them to being one of the best offensive teams in the league. I think a duo of Ja Morant and Kevin Durant would work to perfection. Ja's playmaking and interior scoring along with KD's exterior scoring, his shooting, his ability to pull up in the mid-range area, Ja's ability to cut to the basket and KD's playmaking, and vice versa. I think that would be a fantastic duo. Still with shooting, they're not giving up Desmond Bane. If they don't give up Brandon Clark, he would be a great role man for both Ja, as we've seen, and KD, and they would still have a pretty good defensive system with energetic guys that can get in the way and get steals and some decent rim protection as well. So I think, again, this would work really well for both teams, and I would expect both teams to improve because of this trade. So there you have it. I think at this point and in the future, in a month or two, these are the most realistic trade offers for Kevin Durant, and it'll be really interesting to see what team he starts the season with for 2022 and 2023. Overall, this situation is fascinating and very interesting to analyze, and I want to hear your guys' opinions too. So leave your thoughts on this situation with Kevin Durant down below in the comments, and what team you think he's going to start the season on in 2022 and the 2023 NBA season. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you're new, make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you all next video.